Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Krimo Bo, and I'm very happy to welcome you to this another community-led webinar. We'll just probably take 2 more minutes to give a chance to some participants to join us. So we'll get back in around 2 minutes. All right. Thank you very much. All right. So welcome again, and let's start the webinar. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Krimo Buau, and I'm the Director of Product Knowledge and Engagement at Explorance. Today's webinar is a road toward the institution-wide adoption of formative feedback practices with Bluepulse for student success. Our guest and presenter is Dr. Eric Goodman. He's Vice President of Education. Dr. Goodman has over 25 years of experience in higher education, with almost 20 years as a higher education administrator. He has served as a Chief Academic Officer and Vice President of Academic Affairs, as well as Business School Dean for over a decade. As a results-oriented and data-driven leader, Dr. Goodman is passionate about creating an exceptional student experience and improving educational outcomes. He holds a PhD in Business Administration with focus in organization development from the University of Colorado at Boulder, where he has also earned a master's degree in business administration and a bachelor degree in marketing. On behalf of our community and Explorers, I would like to welcome Dr. Goodman, and I wish you all a great webinar. Before we start and give a mic to Dr. Goodman, I'd just like to make sure that 2 items, housekeeping items. Could you click on the hand button just to make sure that you're confirming that you're hearing me? Please do. There is a hand button, and this is also a way to let us know that you have a question in case you'd like to ask a question. We'll keep the questions towards the end. We will have a QA session at the end of the presentation by Dr. Goodman, but it's practical if you can write them in the question span. So you write the questions in the chat window, and we'll get them all collected in the question pan so that we can respond to them at the end of the session. Thank you very much. I can see many hands raised there. That means that you can hear us well. So without keeping you more than that, I would like to give the mic to Dr. Goodman, and please go ahead, Dr. Goodman, and good webinar, everyone. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Krimo, for the introduction. And it's a pleasure to have this opportunity to visit with everybody today. I'd like to share a few things with you before I actually get started. So I had a team member that was actually leading this initiative who's no longer with us as of a couple weeks ago. So I will do my best to answer all the questions you have. Obviously, I was leading this initiative with the assistance of her, and want to walk you through a couple key areas and talk about our adoption of this feedback tool, Bluepulse, in terms of improving student success. As Krimo mentioned, please feel free to type in your comments in the chat as we go, so that way we can come back and address those questions since you're in a listen-only mode right now. Having said that, one of the things that I think is really helpful is to give you a little bit of an overview of where we're headed with this. And so what I'd like to do is share with you just briefly a view of where we're going to focus today. So first, we want to start a little bit of background about our organization, and then talk a little bit about the shift in terms of some of the assessment mindset, if you will. And then for many of you, I know some of you are at different levels of familiarity with Bluepulse, but I thought it would be helpful to spend a little bit of time, because it'll build on some of what I talk about with formative assessment, to talk about Bluepulse, share with you the approach that we took, and indirectly, in terms of how we approached the pilot, share some lessons learned, pointing out some implementation challenges. And of course, I think probably most of you are here because you want to understand what not to do, and some best practices as well. And then I'll share with you the next steps in terms of where we're headed as an institution, and then we'll have an opportunity for some question and answer at the end of the session. So to begin with, we are education affiliates, and we are an organization that basically is a parent company to 43 plus campuses, some of which are under different brands, if you will. We're in the proprietary space. We're in 17 different states with over 11,000 students, and we have approximately 40 programs with a focus really in the healthcare arena. About 3/4 of all of our students are focused in healthcare, with nursing, allied health, medical technology, which encompasses a variety of programs, as well as some trades, business, and technology programs. So it gives you an idea of the scope of our institution. So we're different in the fact that we were able to look at this pilot uniquely, and we have an opportunity to try things out in different school settings and see what works and what doesn't work and come up with some best practices. So with that context, first of all, I think it's important when we talk about assessment to think a little bit about what assessment is. And when you think about broadly defined, I mean, assessment is just an ongoing process of having clear measurable outcomes of student learning, ensuring that there are opportunities to achieve those outcomes, and then you're systematically collecting some evidence, reviewing and interpreting that information, determine how well the actual learning matches expectations, and ultimately you're using those results to improve student learning and development. When you think about it though, a lot of when I actually sort of started in the teaching profession, or even in my PhD program going back then, a lot of the focus was on this idea of summative assessments. I thought it would be helpful to take a minute and talk about formative versus summative assessment. And when we think about formative assessment, which is really a focus of Bluepulse, formative assessment provides us with opportunities to observe how well students are achieving one or more of the course learning outcomes. And it also provides faculty with constructive feedback so that a student can improve their performance, and it may or may not be graded. Summative assessment, usually sort of thought of in terms of the formal assessment or judgment of student work. It's often used in a citing grade, so it's sort of seen as high stakes. Someone once shared with me this analogy. Formative assessment is what happens when you go to a restaurant and the chef is actually eating his food and trying it and seeing how it tastes. And summative assessment is what happens when he doesn't do that, and he just prepares the dish and serves it to you. So having said that, this is a definition that I think is really helpful, and it's all those activities undertaken by teachers and or by their students which provide information to be used as feedback to modify the teaching and learning activities in which they are engaged. And you'll notice on this slide there's some images, and I think when we think about assessment, I mean, a critical part of it is that word in this definition, feedback. And there's a lot of feedback mechanisms, some that may monitor your speed, some that may monitor your activity. Are you getting enough steps in every day so that you can maintain the weight or get to the weight that you'd like to be at? Ultimately, there are different tools that shape behavior, or may not, depending on how you view it and how you utilize the tools. And so from a perspective of looking at formative assessment, I think it's important that there are certain features of formative assessment that need to be in place for it to work as effectively as possible so you get the intended results. And here's some good bullet points, I think, and reminders that you really need to have more broadly a culture of assessment. And we all know that from external agencies, accreditors in particular, there's been a push probably for the last 20 years to really move towards a culture of assessment, but to encourage and use different assessment tools, and that involving students in that process, their active involvement in the learning process will help them obviously achieve their outcomes. And then you need to be able to establish learning goals and track progress, and that applies certainly establishing the learning goals to summative assessment as well. But I think the difference is with formative assessment, you have a little bit more of an opportunity to track the progress of students as they go through the material or the information that's being shared or the activities. Also, it's best if you have varied instruction methods to meet diverse needs of students. And we'll talk more about how the Bluepulse is an incredible tool for you to actually understand some of the diverse student needs more easily, rather than waiting to the end of a course when you find out in your end of course survey that there's things that maybe weren't as appropriate or that the students wish you would have been doing to help vary your instructional methods. And then again, you know, by using those varied approaches, you're able to assess student understanding more effectively And then ultimately the feedback that you get through formative assessment can help you adapt your instruction. With that said, I mean, why assess? I mean, the bottom line with any assessment is we're trying to improve things. We're trying to evaluate and measure and have a cycle of continuous improvement. Specifically with formative assessment, we're talking about enhancing the engagement and the teaching and learning process, not only for students, but also for faculty, where it can be an incredibly powerful tool to empower faculty to help them develop their skill set, but also empowering students to give them a voice during the term in a positive and safe environment, because we all know there are some students in a classroom that may not feel comfortable raising their hand or asking a question, or if it's in online, you know, posting something or what have you, because they may not, you know, feel comfortable or confident about the question they're asking, and they're afraid of how they might appear among their peers in the course. Ultimately, you know, through any of these types of assessments, but particularly formative assessment, you know, it will help improve student success. You know, that's sort of the holy grail when you think about it. And you know, when you're improving the student success and they're mastering the learning outcomes or getting, you know, to that point, a byproduct of them learning the information is that they're going to persist. They're going to be engaged in the course. They're going to complete the course, and ultimately retention in the class and in the program improves so that they can go on and pursue the career that they intended to when they came to your school. I think back, you know, 20 plus years ago to one of the first books that I read on classroom assessment techniques, and I know it was reprinted in the early 90s, Classroom Assessment Techniques. And it's one that I relied on as a professor in the classroom to give me some different ideas around how to improve things. And I think ultimately this idea, again, Bluepulse has taken this idea and incorporated into a 21st century approach. With a classroom assessment technique, the goal is to improve learning that's in progress and provide students with information to help them learn more effectively, while providing faculty with the feedback as well to inform the day-to-day instructional decisions that they're making in terms of how they approach the course, and to encourage the view of teaching really as an ongoing process of inquiry, experimentation, and reflection. And I'll give you an example of some feedback one of our faculty at a campus of ours experienced with Bluepulse that was really a reflective moment for her. The other thing is, when you look at classroom assessment techniques, traditionally there's opportunities to look at course-related knowledge and skills. And one of the things that I always did as a professor was, you know, not every week, but, you know, at least several times throughout the term, I would have students do a minute paper. And, you know, that was the old school approach to say, hey, what was the most important thing you learned today? Or what's the most important unanswered question that you still have? And then you could ask a variety of different things, most interesting thing or the surprising thing. And I was in the back in the day when I had to use a lot of paper. So I would literally print out a piece of paper, I'd do a half sheet, hand it around the classroom, and ask that question. And in other cases, I'd ask a similar thing, you know, about information they found confusing, you know, from what they had read prior to coming to class. At the beginning of class, I might often give them something like that, or what did they want me to go a little bit deeper into, so that they would get an opportunity to understand the material. You can always just do a background knowledge probe as well, understanding what they already know and don't know, and sometimes that can take a variety of forms. Some of the other techniques, though, you can tap into things like values, attitudes, you know, their self-confidence, how they approach learning. And some of that, you know, tools from a classroom assessment techniques, some of you may be familiar with, was from a process analysis or a critical incident questionnaire, more of a way of formalizing that. And probably one of my favorite techniques that I always used to use was, you know, asking students about specific things I did in the classroom. Which was a start, stop, and continue. What do you want me to start doing that I'm not doing? What do you want me to stop doing that isn't working, that annoys you? What's working well that you want me to continue doing? And then also, I would invite students to write and reflect on either an activity or an exercise that I used in class, or also, you know, particularly at the end of the course, a letter to their successors, like students that were going to follow in their footsteps. What advice would they give to them? But more importantly, what advice would they give to me to change for the next student's benefit so that they would have a richer interface and experience in the classroom. When you look at current methods of formative feedback, there's a number of current methods that are likely utilized at your campuses. Midterm reviews, probably the most common example, and you can contrast this with the end of course review where, you know what, it's too late. Okay, you're getting feedback, it's helpful, and a lot of faculty hopefully are looking at those. I know I did and took it to heart, the feedback I got, to at least adjust it for the benefit of the next cohort or next group of students that were coming in. Certainly using a midterm reviews is really helpful, and that's something that is formalized at a lot of institutions. It may not be at yours. So a midterm review, you know, again, it's once in the middle of the term, so it's pretty infrequent. Discussion forums, you know, again, whether you're using an LMS to support the learning in a class or you're doing something outside of that to supplement it, even a Facebook group or something that may be in use, you know, those aren't confidential. And so again, the level of comfort that a student has in sharing that may or may not support the best learning. Obviously, there's rating websites where students are going out and posting feedback about different faculty, you know, something you don't have any control about. Social media as well. If you're using a lot of tools, it's great to supplement that, because we know of many of our students today live in the mobile world and we want to meet them where they're at. At the same time, it doesn't give you the ability to analyze the information. Email, asking for things, you know, and feedback via email, it can be really a rich way of getting information. However, it can be very labor intensive, and to be able to quickly identify common themes, and it can be a challenge, particularly if they're open-ended questions you're having people respond to. And of course, you know, as you know, face-to-face, you know, you're in a classroom, you're looking at the students, are they nodding, are they tracking, are you asking questions, you know, but to get a pulse from all of the students and understanding, yeah, who understands it, who doesn't, and who doesn't, that's really willing to admit it, is another story. But, you know, you're limited by the amount of time you have to really understand what is happening in the classroom. So with that, what is Bluepulse? For those of you who aren't familiar with Bluepulse, it's a live formative feedback platform that's built to cultivate deep learning and drive student success. And one of the things that I wanted to do before I move on is just share with you a very brief video that will give you a sense.
University and college instructors want to know what their students are thinking, whether it's about the effectiveness of their teaching, whether they feel they're gaining the knowledge they need to succeed, or whether or not to drop a course altogether. But students aren't always engaged or comfortable enough to speak up about those issues that concern them. Instead, they might be more inclined to talk amongst themselves on social media or on popular ratings websites. To maximize their educational impact, university and college instructors need to be a part of these conversations, and they can be with Bluepulse by Explorance. Bluepulse brings all those conversations happening everywhere into one place. An instructor-led online social feedback hub that supports and assists teaching excellence, student learning objectives, and at-risk students. Bluepulse cultivates learning and achieves greater student success. It's an exclusive platform for students and instructors to engage privately and free from judgment. Here's how it works. First, Bluepulse supports teaching excellence by letting instructors and students engage with each other about any classroom issue at any time during the semester. Students engage knowing they'll experience firsthand the benefits of voicing feedback. And engagement is one click away from anywhere and any device, so it's easy and completely anonymous. Even the shyest of students are comfortable getting involved. With more students providing regular feedback on one platform, instructors have timely and accurate insight throughout the semester they can use to track what to start doing, what to stop doing, and what to continue doing to improve the educational experience of their students. Gathering student feedback is only the beginning. Until now, there's never really been a way for instructors to get honest answers from students about whether they feel they understand what's being taught. But, like an invisible show of hands, Bluepulse gives instructors the ability to directly ask questions to which students can reply without being identified. So learning can be gauged immediately following the delivery of a module, and instructors know whether to move on or course correct their methods if learning objectives fall below expectations, giving their students every opportunity to meet a favorable learning result. This unprecedented look into student learning leads to one final Bluepulse feature. the ability to spot and approach any students failing to achieve desired learning objectives, those most at risk of dropping courses or even dropping out altogether. Through Bluepulse, an instructor can initiate a two-way communication with a disengaged student while the student's identity remains unknown to instructors. This revolutionary ability to address a student's concerns may just be what gets them back on track to success. Bluepulse supports teaching and learning excellence throughout the semester, resulting in a student body with increased learning results that affects overall student retention. And most importantly, student success. It's a triple win for students, instructors, and higher education institutions alike. That's Explorance's Classroom Feedback Hub in under 3 minutes. To find out more, please visit our website at www.explorance.com/Bluepulse or give us a call at 877-938.
Okay, so again, for those of you who are familiar with it, excellent. You've got a sense of the opportunities there for the information. And I think when you look at the tool from a perspective of what is robust, let me just actually see, I ran into a little issue, it looks like, with sharing this. There we go. Sorry about that. Bluepulse is a tool that, again, it really, I think back to probably 10 years ago, using like clickers in the classroom or rolling out an iPad initiative where we use different tools to really help get a pulse. Bluepulse is so simple in terms of the ability to check in with your students. And it's really, 3 simple steps. You're checking in to see what students are learning throughout a course. You're getting the feedback confidentially from your students throughout a course, and the students have the option to do it confidentially or to share their identity as well. And then you have the opportunity to follow up and provide support to the students interactively and dynamically, where faculty can decide then, what to follow up on, and then oftentimes, what the best approach for follow-up will be. But it's really this continuous improvement cycle coming full circle. I think from a perspective of other things that I've seen, there's so many different formative tools that are out there that from a digital perspective that you may have used, or some of your faculty at the campuses may have used. But Bluepulse is different from a number of perspectives because it's live, it's available when you need it. So you can quickly utilize it, just in time to get input and really a pulse, Bluepulse, on what's happening in the classroom. From a perspective of it being formative, again, it's that process. So it's going to complement the summative evaluation that you're capturing in the course. And the nice thing about it is it's a feedback loop. It's really a two-way process. And it gives you, as a faculty member, the ability to initiate that, process and ask questions, but it also gives the student the opportunity to initiate and start with information they may want to send you as a faculty member. Again, it's really a controlled environment where, as the institution or the faculty, that you can be in control of what is happening in that conversation. And the nice thing about it is it really can expand the walls of the classroom. I know many of you may have flipped classrooms where you're utilizing that type of approach and having students do things online outside of the classroom. This is a really helpful tool, and we'll talk more about the access to it, but it can really give you a greater control and even a little bit more flexibility around that. As I shared earlier, it can be confidential, so it's really a safe place for students to speak up and know that it's okay to ask a question that they may not know the answer to, or to express confusion or frustration about something that's happening in the classroom in a confidential manner. Again, it's easy to use. It's developed around a mobile capability at its core. So, whether you're in a classroom that has computers, or you got laptops, or you don't have anything, and students have, a smartphone or some sort of, mobile device that they're using, a tablet or so forth, whether it's in the classroom, outside of the classroom, very simple to use. And then ultimately, all of the information that is captured goes into a central place, and I'll share a little bit more about that, so that, again, you've got information based on what's happening in the classroom so that you can guide then the next steps. Real quickly, just a overview so you can get a sense, but if you haven't used Bluepulse, I mean, it's simple to ask a question. They have a tool called QuickPulse where you can just basically on the fly ask a question. You can also schedule questions through their question editor. So if you have a recurring question you want to ask at the end of every class, like, what was the most confusing thing today? Or, what was the most important thing you learned? Some of those classroom assessment techniques, minute paper type things that you want to set up, you can set that on a recurring basis. And you can also share other thoughts through the QuickPulse capability. And lastly, for the students that are in your class, per se, you can add important questions to their to-do list. So you can set that up. Obviously, there's integration as well within, utilizing this if you've got a learning management system and so forth. You can use it from a faculty perspective to start or continue a conversation, send a follow-up. Sometimes, there may not be enough time during the actual class constraints to do that, so it gives you an opportunity to send a follow-up with more details or information, or based on what the dialogue is that's occurring within Blue, to have an opportunity to answer a question that maybe wasn't asked during the class. And again, whether it's residential or online, you've got the ability to also share the results of a question that you posed with the entire group, again, confidentially, and then students can provide unsolicited feedback at any point in time. And again, they can choose to make it confidential, or they can share their identity. And you've got Central Pulse, which is really the hub, where you've got the ability as a faculty member to track the question responses for a single course or all the courses you're teaching. You've got some robust reporting capability where you can create reports based on a wide range of criteria that you want. And you can also ask a question very easily, whether it's copying or editing the question or making that available. And the nice thing is you got a dashboard in there where you can see the level of engagement activity, and a color-coded indicator showing sort of the cold, warm, and hot in terms of how engaged are the students? Are they participating? Are they asking questions? Are they answering the questions you're asking? So it's a combination that the engagement indicator taps into to look at that. And again, here's a screenshot where basically, what do you want to ask your students? You type it in, and you can select the things that you want to pose as potential answers. This is sort of the multiple choice. Obviously, there's open-ended, there's different question types, but for QuickPulse, you're a little bit more limited on that. So sometimes the capability you have through some of the other question tools is a little bit more robust. But one of the things that we found in the pilot is, depending on how you're using this, the more fun you can make the potential answers from a humorous standpoint, the better off, because students tend to engage a little bit more in that. But let me share with you now the goals of using Bluepulse for our institution. They really echo what you saw in the video earlier, and what I shared about formative assessment was to improve student engagement, both peer and faculty, to provide a just-in-time tool for faculty to get feedback, and then that ultimately empower them to make instructional improvements or changes so that ultimately we could improve student learning and outcomes. And more specifically, as we looked at our initial pilot, we wanted to explore the use of Bluepulse in a variety of environments with different instructors and students. And then from that, be able to gain insights from the pilot schools on the effectiveness of the tool from both the faculty and student perspective so that we could plan for a wider rollout. And so with that, I want to talk through some of the things that we did with our pilot that we actually embarked on. And when we first started, we were trying to figure out, okay, who will be using Bluepulse and how will they access it? And there's a number of things that are possible with Bluepulse. We did not have LMS integration at the time initially, so we had to figure out, okay, what does that look like to get this integrated into our LMS? And then, of course, there's a web application that students could use. We also did not have, we've got through our student information system, we have a student portal, which we did not have integration into at the time. And we decided we wanted to get the pilot out there before we complete, as soon as possible, not waiting for all these other integration components to come into place. So we did proceed with the LMS integration and really relied on the other direct access that students can have through the web, basically, to reply to the different questions that were posed. And then, we went through a process, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, how we introduced faculty and students to Bluepulse in terms of the onboarding, which is a really critical thing to think about. Other main thing that we found was that when it came to student engagement, one of the biggest question was, okay, well, what do we ask the students? What makes sense? If I've got this tool now, what should I ask students that would help them learn, that would help me better serve them and adjust my instruction based on the feedback, so that their engagement can guide the course. And then the other thing we recognized was that we really wanted to have a strong advocate for students getting involved with this. And we came up with the idea of a faculty champion, which I want to share a little bit more about in a minute. But our initial pilot consisted of 5 schools, or 5 campuses, so it's across multiple programs within each of the campuses or within each of the schools. Obviously, this is something that had support from the leadership level. As the Vice President of Education, I was the sponsor that said, let's figure out how to make this happen. We've been using Blue as a survey tool, and so this was the next logical step for us to really continue to evolve our culture of assessment in a way that would support the student outcomes we're seeking. And so we went through the process and we identified the pilot schools. And I think as you think about that, schools in our case, these were discrete schools. And now you may have within your university a school of business or school of education or engineering or so forth, school of arts. But you really want to think about, if you haven't rolled out Blue, what's the scope of the rollout? Are we rolling it out across the entire university, or if you happen to be in a multi-campus system like we have, are you rolling it out across multiple campuses? But we looked at that and identified pilot schools based on some similar criteria that I'll really share with you when it comes to faculty champions. But we looked at the campus, the mix of programs, because we wanted some schools that maybe had programs that were already a little bit more technology centric and others that were not in terms of, IT programs versus some of the healthcare, more hands-on programs. And then with that, looking at really what was the culture for those schools? Were they schools that were sort of early adopters, as we put it? Were they eager to embrace new technology and try new things? Do they have a continuous mindset of improvement? And again, whether you look at this idea of a fixed versus a growth mindset, these are people in aggregate, campuses we look at and said, wow, that campus is always looking to improve and to do things better. And then once we identified those pilot schools, we asked the schools to identify a champion, somebody at their campus that actually I'll share the criteria, and then to also identify the faculty. But the role of the campus champion was really to serve as a single point of contact during the pilot, and to be able to provide local leadership to support the effort of the faculty. And as issues came up at the school, to make sure they were escalated to myself or others so that we could resolve them if there was something that needed to be addressed, because chances were if they were having an issue, there were other schools potentially having that same issue. And then they were also the individual that represented the school at what we considered a midpoint check-in and the end of a pilot debrief. And that was sort of the formal structure we had in place when we first conceptualized the campus champions. But one of the things that we did was when we pulled together the campus champions and helped them understand the capability of Bluepulse, and again, just unbelievable support from the team at Explorance and Bluepulse, and they did an excellent job in helping us navigate some of the terrain and providing the demos and some sandbox areas for people to explore and try things in a non-threatening manner, just like is intended for Bluepulse. And so with that, then, as we came together, the champion said, well, wait, we want to talk more often. We don't want to just do this at our campus and come together at a midpoint check-in. So we actually ended up establishing a weekly conference call since we had distributed schools where individuals came together and we talked through what they were experiencing and shared best practices along the way. Something that I certainly would encourage as well. So again, with that specific kickoff meeting though, for onboarding the champions, we also included the leadership at the campus. So it wasn't just like this is a faculty thing. We had deans, we had campus president and other administrators involved, so they understood what this project and pilot was all about. And we explained the scope, gave them an opportunity to practice their logins, both from a view as a faculty member as well as a student, so they could see, and we had people sort of switch roles so that a faculty member was in a faculty role and some of the faculty played the role of the student, and had an opportunity to practice using that. And then we developed a communication plan for onboarding the faculty and students. And then, as I mentioned, we decided to have more frequent check-ins and frequent meetings, and really made a point with any escalation or any issues, our goal was to address those as soon as possible. And when it came to Beyond the Champion, then the school deans were the ones that we had identified the faculty. And again, we really wanted individuals that embraced the opportunity for professional development, were interested in continuing to improve, and had some sense of, utilizing technology, although again, this is a very easy technology to utilize. But then after we identified those faculty, the deans shared that with the champions at the school, and then the champions led the training at the school. And, part of what they did initially to get the buy-in was have the discussion like, here's this tool. And without sharing a lot of the background and here's some potential uses, they said, well, what do you think? And how could you use it in the classroom? How might this be helpful to the student experience? And so basically, they came up with a list, and then we shared some of the sort of standard canned approaches or ways that you could use the Bluepulse. And then the champions had faculty identify strategically one question per week. That was the minimum we expected of them. What we found was a lot of the faculty went well beyond that in terms of more questions, but we wanted to make sure they had a plan going into the term where they had thought through what they were going to do. And then with onboarding students, basically faculty introduced it in class during week 1. We had students download the app and connect on the mobile device together in the classroom so we could make sure that they were able to do that. It's a great pairing system in terms of having a little QR code or however you want to do it. It made it really easy, and that was something that just to give the students a level of comfort with that. We did actually have a few campuses introduce it prior to the first week, and by that, they actually invited the students to a special meeting before class started, sort of a pseudo orientation, if you will. And then, if you serve some cookies or pizza, obviously you can get the students to show up more easily. But that went really well. And again, in the onboarding of students, similar to what we did with the champions in the onboarding process, was we shared sample questions and answers. That opportunity really made a huge difference in the onboarding students. But I think probably the biggest factor in terms of a successful student experience was the enthusiasm of the faculty and their desire to embrace this, but also to really share the information with the students in terms of how this is going to be used in the course, and then how it's fed back to the students to guide and change what they were doing. So again, we focused on engaging the champions and keeping them engaged throughout the entire pilot by making sure we were responsive, answering questions. We did have the mid-pilot champions check-in. Many of them had weekly at the campus or the school level. They had weekly check-ins with all their faculty, often more frequent than that. But really, from a system level with the pilot, we were able to exchange ideas and ask questions in terms of what worked and didn't work. And in terms of that discussion with the champions, some of the things we would ask were questions like, when you're first getting started with Bluepulse, were faculty able to readily access Bluepulse? Were the students? What worked well? What didn't work well? How much time was spent preparing questions, getting acclimated to the system, whether it was preparing questions or becoming comfortable with the tool, training students, or what have you. Also then, like once the term was underway, how much time did it take each week for them to use Bluepulse, either adding questions or reviewing responses, answering student questions about the system, things like that. And again, with that faculty, the engagement of the faculty was that regular contact with the champion, with regular contact with other faculty in the school pilot as well. So again, it's sort of that cohort going through it together and discussing, as I shared, what's working, what isn't working, and then just encouraging them to use it organically, since it is, you got the quick pulse capability within Bluepulse. This can be just in time, and if you've got something that you really, you're scratching your head about in the class, based on some of the nonverbals you're seeing, or maybe if it's an online class, some of the things that are getting posted, you can put a question out there very quickly. And I think in terms of engaging students during the pilot, a couple of things, lessons learned. We made sure that the campuses and the faculty really were transparent in terms of how they were applying the feedback they got from the students to guide and change the direction of the course. And that really made a difference in terms of students recognizing, hey, I just sent a comment about that and I'm seeing that, they stopped doing that. It was a stop, start, and continue. Or, they asked a question and the faculty members actually addressing it. Or, what do you want, what's the most important thing? Even week one, a lot of them asked, what do you want to learn during this course? Why'd you sign up for it? What do you hope to get out of it? Things like that. And then they made sure that that got incorporated into what they were doing. Also, the types of questions and the timing that worked well was we found that a lot of times the multiple choice question, again, unless it was sort of a humorous multiple choice response, they didn't maybe get the same level of engagement or information. We found that short answers really were favored by students. I mean, they would elaborate. They would take a short answer, but I think they wanted the voice. They wanted to share more than just answering, an A, B, or C, D multiple choice question. And then the other thing we had was it had a couple of faculty actually incorporated it as an expectation into the homework, which really drove up the participation. Some examples of some questions that engage students, and I shared some of the sort of those classroom assessment technique type things earlier. But I think, what were any parts of today's topics that are still fuzzy? What type of learner are you? Great question that was asked at the beginning of a class to really understand, how best to approach it in terms of, are they visual, auditory, kinesthetic learner, or by whatever sort of metric in terms of, to contextualize that. Asking feedback about a group activity. What kind of questions from the review do you want, to cover during maybe the next class? Some of the implementation challenges we saw were just the mindset, getting the buy-in. Again, we were very strategic in terms of the approach with the champions and identifying faculty up front. But I think just more broadly is shifting this idea of, rather than the summative assessment, was to create a culture of assessment where you're not just waiting for the end of course survey for indirect assessment feedback. You're getting it along the way and making sure that people understood the value of it and that faculty saw this as an opportunity to really develop their approach. And one example I'll share, I'll never forget, we were on this call, and a faculty member who'd been teaching this course for probably a decade, and I kid you not, the same way, and had her favorite exercise that she had refined over the years and everything else. And she had never used a classroom sort of assessment technique or, a formative approach to getting feedback on that particular activity that she was so proud of. But when she got the feedback from the students, she recognized it wasn't what she thought it was. It wasn't the next best thing since sliced bread. They really hated it, actually. But they gave her suggestions on how to evolve that. So it was eye-opening for her. But I think the fact that they could share that feedback confidentially really gave them the opportunity to provide some feedback, which allowed her to change that then for the next time she did that pretty significantly and had much better results the next time. One of the implementation challenges is just what type of time is going to be required and how do you use the data and providing effective feedback, and then having a consistent approach among faculty. Other things we found that were helpful was to build a bank of questions throughout the term and be able to reuse those, especially the popular ones, and have recurring questions. Again, you can use that schedule tool to gauge students' learning and increase in student engagement by making sure you're following up with them, sharing the responses with the class so they can see you're actually using it. And then also, we had some classes where we might have, rad tech or medical lab technicians, surgical tech students, and nursing students. But, when we do certification prep reviews, using Bluepulse sometimes to address questions in a summative evaluation where the students had difficulties. And so there were a number of things that got adjusted, whether it was certification exam prep, how that was approached, in-class activities, adjusting the amount of time you spent on a topic, because it really gave faculty insight to say, hey, I need to spend more time. Students are confused with this, and had they gone just sort of based on their lesson plan, they wouldn't have done that. They wouldn't have recognized it, that I got to really spend more time on this topic before I move on to make sure students understand it, because it's foundational. And, basing that on the student learning preferences as well. And so for us, what's next is we've got this now integrated in the student portal. We're planning a second pilot on a much larger scale. We're going to probably triple the number of schools that we have involved. And we're also going to promote a little bit more the student-initiated feedback. So we're in this process of raw planning right now to get there. So with that, what I'd like to do is pause and open it up for questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Goodman. Time for questions. I already have received one from Stephanie Klein. Can you see it, Dr. Goodman?
Let me double check if I can see it. I'm not seeing it yet.
It should be in your chat window.
Hold on a second. I apologize. I am not seeing. Oh, wait. What percentage? Yeah. Okay. Let me just repeat it for the benefit of others. What percentage of students are unable to participate because they don't have a smartphone, laptop, or tablet in class with them? What we found was the vast majority of students were able to participate. We only ran into a handful of students that had a cell phone that was the old, flip phone type that wasn't a smart device. So it was north of probably 98%. I mean, the vast majority had some sort of smartphone device that made it very easy. And even in some of the programs, I mentioned we had some trades programs. We even went under our umbrella. You can see the image there for an organization that has CDL, which is truck drivers. And so even for those, I was one of the populations where we don't have setups where we're going in the lab or doing stuff. We're not rolling out laptop cards to them. They're in a cab or on the range driving and doing things, as well as having some classroom. But even they were able to embrace it, and we found very few students that have access. And certainly, outside of the class or the campus, that give students more of an opportunity. Great question. What other questions do you have?
Yeah, please don't hesitate to write them in the chat window. That will help to collect them.
And if you don't mind too, I'd like to get a pulse on how many of you are currently using Bluepulse. So if that's something that you can either raise your hands, or if you're using it, type using it in the chat room, just to get a sense of where you're at in the process.
If you can raise your hand, that would be great.
And Cremo, since you can see that, I'm not able to see that. Give me a sense of that.
I see one person. So this is all people that are looking for probably to know more about Bluepulse. That's great. We're touching a community that is curious to know how to use Bluepulse. I see only one person raised her hand, Donna Davis.
Excellent.
But yeah.
So for the rest of you, what other questions do you have about Bluepulse or our pilot that might be helpful as you think about the potential utilization? And I think more broadly too, while you're typing those in the chat box, this is a tool that isn't just classroom centric. We had some campuses begin to use it to get a pulse on some of the other student services on the campus or in the library, or feedback about other things that they wanted input from the students. And that was a really helpful thing also to think about is, it really just gives you an opportunity to look at service areas. And then there's actually a couple faculty that said, you know what, I'm going to incorporate this into my office hours and make sure that, I have an opportunity to do that. And then based on the types of questions that would come up, whether it was real-time office hours face-to-face with the student or virtual, they were able to then, send out a information or share data based on, something that one student had a question about with the entire class. So the other question, and great question, Elena, is have we evaluated the impact of using Bluepulse on student learning outcomes and grades? We did make an effort to do that. However, I don't think it was controlled enough for us to know exactly. So as we look at future pilots, one of the things we're trying to do is isolate that a little bit more in terms of the same instructor and their utilization and looking at the trending, or also looking at opportunities where we may have, ideally, an instructor or faculty member teaching multiple sections of the same course and being able to do it in one and not in the other. So, but again, anecdotally, so we did hold focus groups with after this as well as part of the debrief, not only with faculty but with students to get their feedback, and it was very positive overall. And there were definitely situations where students felt like, they didn't get lost in the course. That from I guess probably one of the side benefits was this really represented them the fact that we cared about their learning, and the faculty member took the time to ask for their input, adjusted what they were doing in the classroom so they didn't get lost and fall behind in the course, and they were as comfortable asking some of those other questions. But absolutely, we will be evaluating, not only grades, but looking at things like attendance and persistence, as we continue moving forward. Ultimately, our goal, another question is, do we plan to have every instructor use it? Or do we see this as a tool that only a few instructors will use, even as use grows? I think that initially, our goal is to eventually have the majority of instructors using it. Again, I think, having been involved with other technology type tools like rolling out clickers or doing things in the past, I think, it can be a challenge in terms of, how do you mandate the utilization of this tool by faculty, and then what does that do in terms of their actual enthusiasm around that? So we're very cautious, even with our pilots. We want to build the buy-in and the understanding and make sure faculty understand the value of this tool. Now, whether or not, depending on if they're tenured or not tenured, at your institution, that may play into their willingness to adapt certain tools and change their ways. Having said that, ideally, I think once faculty understand that, you want to create a shift in the classroom, because, I think this idea of being the sage on the stage versus a guide on the side or a facilitator in terms of student learning, we're continuing to see shifts in that. And I spent several years at a university that, is very focused on competency-based learning, for example, but it changes the nature of the faculty role in the classroom, when you're empowering and giving students a voice, and you've got a better pulse on the actual learning that's taking place through the analytics. And depending on, the learning resources you're using as a faculty member, some have better back-end systems than others, especially if they're digital, to be able to really understand where students are getting hung up. But this really helps you do it from a summative perspective in a powerful way. And ultimately, from experience with other technology implementations, what I tended to see is that eventually, even with some of the more seasoned faculty, the veteran ones that are still using their yellowed notes in the classroom, that they come around and they start recognizing, because students start saying, hey, so-and-so is using this tool. We're using this in all these other classrooms, and we're able to do this. Why can't we do it in your class? And they start feeling the pressure from the students and eventually come on board. And so we saw a little bit of that even with the students that were engaged in the pilot, because they had other classes where they weren't. We had to reiterate, this is just a pilot. Yes, we do plan on having this available in more classes, because that was one of the things they were asking for in the focus group. So what other questions? Please don't hesitate to ask. Anything that
was me.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, please don't, we still have a few minutes, so if you have other questions, it would be great to ask them. I don't see any hand.
Okay. Well, you're certainly in great hands with Cremo and Nitin and some other people that are involved with this Bluepulse product. I can't say enough about the level of support, and I think their ability to help you as you consider this tool navigate, an implementation. And I'm certainly happy to answer any other questions that might come up after the fact based on what we learned. And obviously, we're still learning, which is the great thing about this. But I think, again, getting that buy-in, getting the leadership support, and finding those early adopters is really some of the keys to making this successful. And creating a community where people can share best practices will really help you have a smooth process for this. The technology piece is the easy piece. It really is. Compared to how that used to be. It used to be the other side, the other way around, but we really found that it was more, really figuring out, being strategic about the questions, as I mentioned, and having an opportunity for people to engage in this process. So again, I thank you for attending, and I think you'll find the Bluepulse tool can be a powerful complement for your faculty as they look at the type of outcomes they're trying to have their students achieve. So, Cremo, anything?
Thank you very much, Dr. Goodman. That was great. I would just like to remind people that there is a series of other webinars next week about how to use the tool. If people are interested to know how Bluepulse works, so we'll be more than happy. I'll be delivering these sessions. So they're geared towards faculty members to show them how easy it is to use the tool. Like you said, Dr. Goodman, technology is really here, quite easy to understand. Mary, do you have a question? I see your hand raised. Oh, thank you, Jessica. All right, thank you very much, everyone, and I hope to see you in the upcoming webinars. And again, thank you very, very much, Dr. Goodman.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it. Good luck to you.
Bye-bye. Thanks. Thank you, everyone.